Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. My apologies about going out on a Tuesday rather than a Monday, but over here in the UK, we had one of our regular bank holidays. Although it was typical yesterday, was the bank holiday was both wet and windy, and in fact extremely uncomfortable. I don't know if you guys in the UK, but we were badly buffeted here. And I thought it was somewhat of an irony that all of our local pubs seem to have bought or invested in or rented canopies and everything else so that people could eat and drink outside. And I think last night with the wind the way it was, most of them probably blew away, which was rather sad, but one of those things. Today, our guest is somebody I have known now for probably about 6 or 7 years, probably longer, as a gentleman called Nick Kyle. And I've had a series of lectures and talks I've given up in Scotland over the years. And I must admit that every time I speak in Edinburgh or Glasgow, or indeed when I spoke in Stirling as well, I really enjoy going up there. There's something about the atmosphere of Scotland that seems to add to the interest that people have in matters esoteric. And indeed, not only that, but in terms of mediumship and everything else, there seems to be, because it's the Celtic fringe, you get this feeling that there is this kind of liminal area that takes place up in Scotland. Now, Nick has had a long career as a teacher and a headmaster in schools and everything else as well. But he also has had an alternate career. And he was past president of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research. And every time Nick and I have met, it's one of those circumstances whereby we just get talking. And as soon as we get talking, the most amazing pieces of information come out. And indeed, yesterday, Nick and I touched base on this particular, how we were going to approach this program. And even in the 10 or 15 minutes that Nick was talking to me, there was these amazing pieces of information that I thought, my God, I really need to know about these. And what's going to be wonderful today is that Nick is going to be explaining some of the things that he's been involved in that will be completely new to me as well. And I'm very, very keen to know more about these. So without further ado, Nick, welcome to the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour.
Glad to be here, Anthony.
Right. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in terms of chronology? So just so we can fill in the details of who Nick Kyle is and how you became involved in the work you've been involved in, that you've spent most of your life involved in.
I've been psychically aware since a child, particularly when I lived in South Ballyhullish near Glencoe on the west coast of Scotland, where my father was the local pastor or minister. And I would be in and around the church, and I would sense presences, and I would sometimes look at the stones near the river that ran through the village, and the stones would gleam, not with sunlight. We don't get a lot of sunshine in Scotland, but with a pulsating energy. And I found it comforting, and I quite liked to spend time with certain stones in certain parts of the village. I had a strong interest throughout my childhood in reading about things, but when I began to hear voices, I approached a minister, another pastor actually, and asked him, because I couldn't really speak to my father. And he said, "Oh, that's the Holy Spirit speaking to you." And I didn't go back to him because I don't think it was the Holy Spirit. It was my grandmother. It was her voice, her personality, her mannerisms. She referred to memories that we would have shared. And I felt that my religious acquaintances, Christian and well-intentioned people, would not understand if I said I was able to speak to dead people.
How did the voice manifest then? How was it? Was it during nighttime, daytime? How did it first occur?
I've often been asked, am I clairaudient as a medium? And I would say not usually. If you recollect the words I've spoken in the last few seconds in your short-term memory, that's what it sounds like. I don't think the air's vibrating with a voice that other people could hear, but in my mind, it's as if I just heard it just a nanosecond ago. So I know that it's an unusual voice. It doesn't link to background or environmental sounds. It's inside, but it's a two-way conversation. And none of my Christian teachings seem to refer to having conversations with God, although it's become a more popular concept nowadays. When I went to university, I was surprised by something that other people would take for granted. I was mixing with non-Christians, and I found that actually they had higher moral sensibilities and better characters than some of my Christian acquaintances. And that was a genuine surprise to me. I had always been brought up to think that the best people were the Christians. And when I began to realize that some people had a different world religion or no religion at all, and yet they had higher moral standards and a greater sense of humanity, I paid attention. I literally took the blinkers off and began to look around. And that's where the voices became even stronger. I did study psychology, and I did wonder sometimes whether I was imagining it or experiencing some kind of aberration. But it quickly became clear to me in my early adulthood that the voices always told me the truth. They were never wrong. And sometimes they led to very good outcomes and never negative ones. So I put to one side any natural kind of doubts that I had, and I began to work with this psychic sensitivity, which I very rarely talk about. It really doesn't go down well when you're a deputy head of a secondary school and you talk to dead people. I had to effectively hide that side of my life because of a backlash that I'm sure would have come from the born-again Christian community and people who have a strong reaction to the idea.
I think this is very intriguing, isn't it? Because effectively, a lot of people will turn around and say that, you know, people are socialized to do these things. People become aware of these things and therefore want to emulate them in one case or another. But you're a classic example of somebody that it was completely non-acceptable within your community or within your peer group to be having these experiences. So one cannot argue that these things were something you willed upon yourself. These were things that were happening to you. Why do you think, again, it's intriguing, it intrigues me, and I'm thinking now about some of the research I did on my last book. Was it the Reverend Kirk who wrote a book called the Hidden Commonwealth, I think it was, in Scotland in about the 1740s or 1750s when he was encountering entities and things.
Yeah, I think he had the experiences a few years before, and it was some time before he was published in the 1700s.
Which again, rather like you, he was doing something very, very brave, wasn't he? Because he was going against the Calvinistic tradition of Scotland. That, you know, that this is all nonsense. It's witchcraft. It's popishness. It's all these things. Whereas there was you bravely, or not bravely, but experiencing things that were quite extraordinary. So what do you think what is it that makes certain individuals like yourself, and from your career onwards, you know, what makes certain people open to these things? And indeed, the channels of communication are open for them, where they're not normally open for what I would call neurotypical individuals?
I mean, I would struggle to come down with a definitive answer. I know that my grandmother, whom I referred to as in after-death communication, she used to read tea leaves and teacups until she stopped because she was so accurate she frightened herself. So some people would say, well, it's kind of runs in the family. And to be fair to my father and to other Christian clergymen, when they did speak about spiritual gifts in the New Testament, including being able to pass messages and so on, they saw it as this could be a God-given gift, but let God deal with the development of it. Don't focus on it. Don't train yourself. Don't try to change it in some way. So there is especially on the west coast of Scotland and in Scotland generally, there is an acceptance of this as a kind of gift, but a disapproval of attempts to magnify it or develop it.
That is interesting in itself, isn't it? Because again, on the west coast of Scotland, I suppose, you know, you have the older influences of what I don't know if it's the term is the Gaeltacht or whatever, the area where the kind of the Celtic influences are very, very strong. And it seems almost that area, there's kind of liminality. I have to say that many years ago, I spent some time on the island of Seal. A friend of mine's brother was a lecturer at Stirling University and used to live there. And myself and my friend, we used to wander around in the hillsides around that area. And I have to say that probably, with the possible exception of deep whales, I've never had that sensation of sensing something else that was around me more than anywhere else, I think. And there was something magical in the air. And maybe it was just me because the scenery was beautiful and everything else as well. But there does seem to be something there. So you develop onward, you go to university and everything else, and you keep hearing these voices. So initially your grandmother, and then did the voices continue talking to you, and were other people coming through?
I would label it as a kind of clear cognizance, a clear sentence. I would feel things physically in my body, maybe a kind of gut instinct, and I would focus on the physical sensations and sometimes get information or emotions to follow. And when I focused on the information, I got more of it. So it was more a knowingness. I would walk into a room perhaps that's empty and sense what had just happened minutes or hours before. I would shake hands with someone, which when it was legal to do so pre-lockdown, I would shake hands with someone and get a real strong sense of where they were mentally and emotionally. So that's how it developed. But I heard that there was a distinguished academic in Glasgow giving a series of lectures in the evening on the history of spiritualism. And it was, of course, the late Professor Archie Roy, who was himself a president, not just of the Scottish SPR, but of the London one. And I attended about 20 of his lectures. And afterwards, a friend of mine and myself asked, so what happens now? Is there going to be a second, more advanced series or whatever? And he said, rather disappointingly, there's nothing in Scotland that would allow you to attend lectures of a quality on this area. He said, but I'm going to set up a society. He said, and that will be a lecture society. And that's when the Scottish SPR was born, modelled on the London one. And eventually I took over as president for about 10 years. And I ended it when I retired because I wanted to write and travel the world, and I felt that it would be tying to be around in Scotland every fortnight for the meetings.
So you must have been in a wonderful position there to really be at the leading edge of some fascinating experiments and research. Is there anything in the early years that really struck in your mind that you thought this is quite extraordinary?
I hesitate only because there's so much. I learned so much from Archie Roy and from the first 10 years or so of doing investigations, where I, in my naivety, thought I was going to investigate the paranormal. And eventually I came to accept what I was told from day one, which is you seldom investigate the paranormal. What you investigate are people's reports of past experiences, even if they're very recent. And when you arrive, the plates are not normally whizzing in a circle around your head. The poltergeist phenomenon tends to dissipate as soon as you arrive. What you get are lots of reports of these things that have just happened or happened in the past, and they're no longer around for you. And I used to joke with people that if there is an expert on paranormal experiences, then I'm an expert in stopping them. Because whenever I walk through the door, they seem to implode, they seem to collapse. They very rarely persisted. And of course, it's the ones that did persist that really caught my attention. I mean, I have seen spirit people standing watching investigators doing their job. I have heard them say, what's that? Is that camera? Oh, let's get out of here. And so on. So I've seen apparitions that I think would fit in with a stone tape theory, or they don't seem to interact with the
Could you just explain for the people listening in? I know what the stone tape theory is, but if you can just explain the stone tape theory, because it's quite important.
There's at least two categories of apparition or ghost, as many people call them. One follows a path in the past which doesn't take account of current observers. So they could walk through you, for example. They could walk at a level where there used to be a road or a set of steps and so on, and they do not interact with human observers. And that's sometimes called the stone tape theory. It's just as if you're watching a video which is manifesting from the energy of the environment and surroundings, but doesn't know that you're there. And then you meet people, apparitions, ghosts, who are not only aware that you're there, but sometimes interact with you, and they walk around you, or they pay attention to you, or sometimes they speak to you. And I'm in the fortunate position of, after 30 odd years of doing this, sometimes they linger long enough to have a 15-minute conversation, and they shake hands and they hug and they interact just as human beings in the earthly sense do. It doesn't happen often, and I only ever talk about corroborated experiences. I never talk about experiences where I was the only one present and I'm the only source of validation. Anything I talk about in this conversation will always have at least one witness, and sometimes a dozen witnesses who could be called upon to support what I'm saying. And that's important because I take the same attitude to my own experiences as I do to others: an open-minded caution, a skepticism, a desire to chase the evidence and not be seduced by the appearance of something which could be false.
Yes, because one of the things that we had Stephen Browday, Professor Stephen Browday, on recently on this show, and we were discussing exactly the same thing, you know, the idea of witness veracity and the idea of if it's just a report, it means nothing. It's not, it doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it just means it's not worth anything. But what you're saying here is that you have witnessed events whereby dead people or spirits, disincarnate entities, or whatever of a description, have incarnated in a physical presence, in a three-dimensional presence. Are they ephemeral or are they physical?
No. It's like touching you. They're solid, they're real. I remember once shaking the hand of a materialized spirit person, a male. I know his identity, but I'm not sure I should share it because it's a distraction. And when you offered me his hand, I took it and I shook it, and I could feel the skeletal structure of the hand. I could feel the texture of fingerprinted texture of the skin. I could feel the warmth of the muscles in the hand. And when he was shaking my hand, it was like shaking any man's hand who's got a good, strong grip. And I asked, "Can I feel up your arm?" And he laughed. And he said, "On you go." He said, "I've heard how skeptical you are." And there was no body attached. Above the shoulder, above the upper bicep, my hand went into a forum that wasn't physical. But I was still shaking his hand, and I was still holding his arm and moving my hand up and down, and I realized it was a partial materialization in terms of the physical nature of it. And that happened with a child as well. A child manifested and said, "Would you like to feel my face, mister?" And as I went up the face, and this was in darkness, remember, I went up the face, I got to almost the top of the forehead, and he says, "Oh, don't go any further. I only brought my face through." And I must have expressed a disappointed tone in my voice because I said, "Oh, right." And he said, "No, I'll bring all of me through next time." And sure enough, a week later or so, I was in the same circle, the same circumstance, and I heard this voice, the same little boy's voice, shouting, "Here I am, mister, get ready." And he jumped into my lap. Now, I've worked with children all my life. I know what it's like to have a 6-year-old body, a 6-year-old child, and their mannerisms and the way they speak and the physicality of them. And this child wanted a hug, so I gave him one. And when I squeezed that childish frame, I am no doubt it was physical and it was real and it was animated. And there were no children in the building, and I had the security key for the door.
So you mentioned that this happens in darkness. So you don't. So with all the cases, like the gentleman when you were shaking his hand, could you physically see him?
I've shook several hands, and sometimes I have seen them, yes. But on that particular occasion, it was very dark. I want to explain something because it applies to the Scole experiments as well as my own experiences. Most of the seance experiences I've had have been in complete darkness or very dim light. But when I said to Robin Follery, what are we going to do about lights, exit lights, safety, and so on, he just laughed and he said, "Don't worry about lights, Spirit will take care of that." And in the Scole cellar, which was blackout conditions, There were so many orbs, I could see everyone in the room. Partially, sometimes as the lights moved around, but I could tell where the furniture was. I could see people's faces as the lights moved around for 2 hours. There was no need for electricity.
But why, or I would, taking a skeptical viewpoint here, I'd say, why is it generally the case that the spirits don't allow illumination, so they can't be seen? And secondly, why, like, sort of infrared photography, they don't like that either. Now, somebody who is skeptical would say, well, of course they won't. Because if they're up to no good, or somebody is trying to fake something, that's exactly the kind of circumstances they'd want to be in, because then they can fool somebody into believing things. What's your feelings? What is the reasoning as to why it has to be done in darkness, and why infrared cameras can't be used under these circumstances?
Okay. First of all, first speaking about the Scole experiments, it was the late 1990s. I've been sitting experiencing the same phenomena in bright light in more recent times, the last decade or 12 years. There's a graduation, if you like, in the development of physical mediumship to go from the darkness into the light. But there's no doubt, I think, if you speak to physical mediums, that the light is a complicating factor which they are learning to cope with. So quite a lot of physical mediums will now operate in red light, which is strong enough for you to see everything in the surroundings, people and furniture and placings and movement and so on. But then they move on to electric light or daylight, and they get the same type of phenomena, which of course from the observer's point of view is even more startling and vivid. But to go back to a historical thing, I can think of several reasons. One is the effect on the observer. If I put you into a room in which you can see everything, your eye naturally darts about. Psychologists will tell you, if they've studied visual perception, how active your eyes are. Your eyes are darting dozens of times per second, perhaps, around an environment in order to check it out. And that happens even when you think you're thinking of something else. Your eyes are constantly in motion. And it takes a bit of focused concentration and attention to kind of narrow that field of view down. So when you're wanting the observers to focus on the phenomenon, you don't want to put them into a situation in which their eyes are distracted by 1,000 visual signals. Okay. Another reason historically would be that if you're developing and you can't produce strong phenomena, perhaps a wisp or an orb or a flash or something, you will see that more clearly in a darkened, against a darkened background. I used to say, it might sound a little comedy, but diamonds are best appreciated against a dark background. And it's something similar in the visual perception. You notice small things more. And by reacting to the small things, by welcoming them, by getting excited or happy or encouraging, they get stronger. Yeah. And the third thing I would say is that if you pay attention to what the spirit communicators are saying, and you don't allow, I'm not suggesting you, Anthony, but some critics might come across as arrogant, thinking they understand enough to be able to impose conditions. Whereas the spirit team laugh at that idea and say, if you knew how many people are involved in our site and how difficult it is to achieve even small effects for your entertainment or your edification, you wouldn't even be asking us to impose conditions that suit you. Indeed, you shouldn't even expect us to turn up when it suits your agenda. We're very busy here, and this is what we're doing is not at all easy, and it takes teamwork and sometimes over an extended period, which you won't be aware of because time is different for us. And then they say to you, all interference is unwelcome. Let us decide what's best to produce the learning that is needed. So sometimes they will say it's okay to put the lights on there. But it wouldn't have been in the previous half hour or so. So I just, what I've learned, and it's not going to impress any materialist reductionist kind of cynical points of view. I've learned if I pay attention to what the communicators are saying, more happens.
That's
And if I
interesting.
ignore what they're saying, less happens.
This
So
is
which way
interesting.
would you go? You know, if the person that's speaking to you says, "Nick, do that, but don't do that," and you ignore their advice.
Yeah, because it's interesting, isn't it? Because there seems to be a direct relationship between the expectations of the sitters and the expectations of the people involved in the experiment, be they positive or negative. Is it the sheep and the goats idea? And depending upon whether you're going to be negative in the environment, the manifestations are less. But if you're feeling more positive, they will come through. So there seems to be this very tenuous relationship, which I call the egregorial in my developing work. And it does seem to be that there is this kind of subtlety between what is happening and what is being perceived. And it seems to be a direct feedback mechanism. Now,
I think that's right. Can I give you an example that
please
lead you into maybe the Scole experiment? After my 2 Scole experiences, and they held 30, 40, maybe even 60.
Can you explain a little bit about the Scole experiment now? Again, there'll be guys out there, many will know of it, but many will not. And it is so extraordinary. It is well worth you explaining a little bit of the background and leading us in. So the stage is yours. So explain and go into it whichever way you want, but so we know what Scole was and what was taking place.
Scole is a village in Norfolk, and in the late 1990s, a group of 4, the original 6, but became 4, sat to bring through spirit communication and to develop physical communication. That is materializations and apports, not just verbal or mental mediumship. And they were very successful. So successful that they decided to open them up to invited guests, members of the public, scientists from all over Europe and sometimes the world. And they used their cellar of a mansion house in that village of Scole, hence the name the Scole experiments. And I was invited to one of the sittings in late 1996, and my jaw dropped. I had been in all sorts of seances and been with all sorts of mediums and physical mediums too. I had experienced a lot, but nothing on the scale of Scole. Scole was on another level in terms of the multiplicity of phenomena, including levitation of my dear wife in front of me. You know, it's if you want, I'll tell your readers more of what I experienced, but I want to focus on. Afterwards, I was invited back for a second visit, and I was surprised because I was told that I would only be allowed in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And Robin Foy said, well, the spirit team have told us they want to try an experiment they've never done before, and they want people with really strong energy. So they've asked for the 5 people from Scotland, myself, my wife, and a few friends, to come back specifically for this one experiment and to handpick people from England. And when I came back, there was the usual stunning phenomena. And then there was a period of silence in which we were asked to wait, because the spirit communicators through the mediums, but sometimes through direct voice, said, there are communicators from realms to which we do not normally have access. And we want to see if they can come through now. So there was a few minutes of silence and in the darkness, remember, but with enough light to see what's happening from time to time. And several craft appeared and materialized in the middle of the room, almost as if they were being sketched into existence. And they then appeared to have solidity, translucence initially and then solidity. And they shone lights on the sitters and the objects on the coffee table between us. And they moved round sometimes at speed, and there were different shapes involved. But one was like the classic flying saucer, perhaps 2 feet in diameter. And then after several minutes, they disappeared again.
So they were various shapes, geometric shapes that seemed to be coming through into this reality.
Yes, yes. And I think they were miniaturized, and I have a theory as to why they were miniaturized. Because I think that when they're in their reality, they are very much bigger, very much bigger. But in order to come into our reality at a visual level of frequency, something our limited eyes can pick up, I mean, they have to judge infrared's not good enough, ultraviolet's not good enough. It has to be in human eyesight wavelength. So what they do is they shrink their energies so that effectively the energies bleed into something that you can see. They and I've often thought that little people or fairies may well be 7, 8, 9 feet tall in their original form, but they shrink themselves so that their energy can be perceived by our eyes. But can I go back to the original point I was going to make, which was after the Scole experiments, I spent 10 years working on Scole methodologies without much success. I would get orbs sometimes, I would get flashes of light, I would get accurate clairvoyance, I would get sense of a presence, I would get drops in temperature. But these are traditional spiritualist phenomena. And I was looking for Scole phenomena, something on a much more spectacular level. When I was at Scole, I thought I was sitting in a planetarium until the bright stars and planets and light shapes came down and touched people. So I knew it couldn't be a planetarium. And I have had the opportunity to speak to special effects people in the movie industry. And they said, we could not replicate with an unlimited budget what you say you saw in it. And I said, oh, come off it, guys. If I made you all a millionaire overnight, surely you could produce something like this. And they said, no. And I said, why not? And this is what you said. You're describing three-dimensional objects that moved around the room at high speed, but didn't hurt or injure anyone or bang into anyone. Now, they didn't blur. Our best holographic technology requires oil-dampened platforms the size of a large sofa chair. And they have to be positioned in the room in order to have constant line of sight of the holographic image. Otherwise, it will blur and it will not look solid. And we don't have the capacity to do that at speed. This was in the 1990s. And they said, but there's something else. You say that objects went round people and under chairs, under tables. We need constant line of sight, so we couldn't manipulate that. But there's something else. You said that the lights touched you and sometimes went inside your body, in the case of my wife, inside her rib cage, and tickled her from the inside and made her squeal. We can't produce holograms that have got physicality like that. So take your millions and go elsewhere. That was their advice. But after 10 years of sitting in home circles and church-based circles and finding very limited success, two of my mediumistic friends said to me, Nick, we're going to leave you and do our own methodology because we think you might be more successful. And we left in good terms. And it was a few years later that I was speaking to Robin Foy. I was about to give a lecture on the Scole experiments over in Canada. And I asked him for an update because it'd been more than 10 years since the Scole visits. And I said to him, when the Scole experiments were launched, the spirit communicator, was it Manu, said, we're about to launch a new dawn of man-spirit communication. And I said to Robin, the experiments have been a failure because as spectacular as they seem to be, I don't think there's been a new dawn in man-spirit communication. And he agreed. And I said, of all the groups that you must have inspired, like mine, for 10 years of effort, is there anywhere on the planet that has been able to successfully replicate the kind of physical phenomena that you began to take for granted? And he said, no, nowhere on the planet, to his knowledge, except two people from Scotland. He said, and you know them, Nick, because they used to be in your home circle. And it was these two mediums that I can identify as Tom and Linda Anderson. And that's not usually in the public domain. I always get the permission even to mention the name because it will attract lots of attention and some of it will be unwelcome. They basically want to be left to go on with their work with spirit. And they don't want the world to be queuing up at their door. They've already had offers from millionaires and TV companies and so on. So I phoned my friend Tom and I said, Robin Foy's told me that you have been able to produce phenomena consistent with, and if not better than, what he could do in the Scole experiments. And Tom said, yeah, that's right. We went to their home in Spain and we manifested the entire spirit communication team materially, physically, in the room. There were about 8 of them, and one of them was Blue. And Blue is an alien.
Blue was the major figure, which looked like a grey. Blue was one of the classic images.
Let's just get this right. You weren't just bringing them through and channeling their voices. He said, no, they're physically there in the room. And Robin and Sandra burst into tears because for them it was like meeting lost members of the family that they had never been able to see physically since the Scole experiment.
I think it's important here to clarify that within the Scole experiment, there were a group of entities, individuals that were consistently on the other side communicating, weren't they? There was an Irish guy. There was a handful of them. And they manifested very strong personalities and they became friends of the group. So I would imagine that Robin would have been fascinated by physically seeing these individuals manifested in 3-dimensional space. So was there been a breakthrough in the technology the other side, or what has happened that's changed, and why these two mediums?
Yeah, this is the bit that I've been steering towards for a few minutes. It's what Tom said to me by way of an explanation. Because I said, Tom, you sat with me for most of 10 years and we didn't experience this. And then you left and suddenly you're able to demonstrate something to Robin and Sandra Foy better than they could in the Scole experiment days, although they did physically see and touch and have an interaction with their communicators physically during the Scole experiments. And I said, why didn't you tell me what's happening? And he said, well, we were embarrassed, Nick, because you taught us about the Scole experiments, and we had to develop our own methodology to replicate the phenomena, which is not what you were doing. You were constantly taking fresh phenomena, evaluating it against your experiences in the 90s, and saying, yeah, well, okay, it was an orb or it was a partial materialization, but it wasn't as good as. He said, and that skepticism, that constantly evaluating and rating, he said, brought in a mindset that actually reduced the phenomena. We were sitting excited. We wanted to cheer and clap and laugh and sing and have a stronger emotional excitement. And you were sitting there being a bit like down. He said, so we wanted to remain your friend, but we went and we did the singing, the happiness, the excitement, and spirit came through in their droves to produce the most fantastic phenomena. And he said, but perhaps rather than talk about it, he said, you would like to experience it. And I said, yes. And he invited me to come to an address in Glasgow. And when I turned up, he took me to the seance room where these wonderful phenomena had been taking place. And it was a darkened room. There was nobody there, except, of course, Tom and Linda and my wife Sarah and I. And as I stood on the threshold of the door, I said, can I go in? And he said, just hold on a moment. And I was gripped in my left forearm by an invisible hand who led me to a chair. And when I sat in the chair, it kept its grip, or he kept its grip, quite strong grip. And I said to Tom, Melinda, and Sarah, I've just been led to this chair by someone who's still got his hand in my arm, but I can't see who it is. And they laughed. They said, when we asked Spirit, is it okay to bring Nick into our circle because you know what he's like? They said, we'll give you a sign if that's the case, but bring him to the room. So I was invited to join their seances. I saw levitating furniture. I saw items disappear into walls and ceilings and not always come back. They were physically materialized beings. One girl, young woman, had lost her mother. Her mother materialized, having only died a short time before, and they embraced and they kissed and they spoke. And I could hear the discarnate voice of the mother, now physical, with the obviously grieving daughter. And it was very moving and very emotional. And lots of people came through. And sometimes they said, is it okay if we conduct our experiments? We know that you've got interest in your experiments, but we would like to conduct ours using your energy. And one guy said, I'm going to disappear. And I want, when I return, in a short time, I want you to tell me what you heard. And we said, okay. And then we heard nothing. Except in the distance, perhaps several houses away, we heard someone shout, hello. Yeah. And then the voice of the original communicator returned to the room and said, did you hear anything? And we said, only a distant voice shouting hello. We're not sure where it came from. And he said, yes. I went a great distance and shouted at the top of my voice and tried to get back here at the same time, if not before the voice. He said, and how long was it? I said, maybe half a second or a second. And he said, so now I know in my world that by thinking myself in a different place, I almost travel as fast as the speed of sound. So that's an idea that whatever agenda we've got to satisfy our curiosity, Spirit are interested in learning more about their interaction with our world and what are the limits and capacities. And that's, I'm only giving you one example out of many. I'll give you two more examples.
Please do.
It didn't happen in front of me, but they're very similar to things that have happened in front of me with this Glasgow group, as I call it. On one occasion, Tom said to me, we held a sitting, I wasn't present. And when we put the lights on, everyone was seated in a different chair from where they started, and no one was aware of moving. In other words, if you think about it in terms of a clock face, someone sitting at 1 o'clock position would find themselves at 4 o'clock, and everyone else had moved round, but no one was aware of changing their position. And the only reason they knew, because they were all relative to each other in the same position, was because someone was sitting near a window and now they were sitting in the other corner of the room, and so on, as they each then checked their environment. And Tom said, and we asked Spirit, what was that about? And they said, well, in order to work with you, we transpose the whole group to our world, and then we interact with you. But when we put you back, sorry, we slipped up and didn't quite put you in the right position. And on another occasion, the group were relative to the room and to each other in the same place, except they were about 3 or 4 inches nearer one end of the room. And again, no one was aware of moving. And they only knew because they paid attention because of the previous experience. Everyone had moved just a few inches. I'm saying 3 or 4 inches. It might have been 6 or 7, but a few inches in one direction. When I've been present, my wife has said, I don't think I'm in the room anymore. I'm not aware of walls. I feel actually that I'm in a massive space, a void. And then Linda Anderson said the same, and Tom was in deep trance. And I said, well, I can certainly feel breezes round about me as if I'm not in the room, because the room had no breezes. But beyond that, I can't say. And we were in darkness in that case. So you can imagine if I've taken part in Scole experiments twice and Glasgow seances maybe 7 times, maybe 8 times over a 15, 20-year period, the learning is spasmodic. You get a burst of experience and you reflect on it, but you don't get the opportunity to build on it quickly and consistently. And I think that's a great frustration for psychical researchers. But what I want to emphasize to your viewers is I would not knowingly exaggerate or tell a lie, and everything I'm saying can be corroborated by multiple witnesses. So what I say to people is, keep open the door of possibility when you're thinking about these things. Don't go in saying, I'm looking for the paranormal, but here's a whole list of expectations it has to conform to before I would accept it as paranormal. And just to confuse your readers, perhaps they'll come to the conclusion that I did after 30 years. There is no such thing as the paranormal because it's all normal. It's normal to the people to whom it happens, and it only appears to be abnormal or paranormal to people for whom it hasn't happened, but it's starting. It was Enrico Marabini, a grandfather of psychical research in the north of Italy, who's passed on now, who said to me, Nikki, it's all normal. He said, get used to it and work with it.
Because that is fascinating, isn't it? Because again, it's reinforcing the position I'm moving towards now, that again, going to the concept of the egregorial, that people collectively, when they are together, can manifest something quite extraordinary. Because I very much picked upon your point you said about when they were feeling happy and jokey and childlike almost, reminded me of a lot of the things they were doing in the Philip experiment, wasn't it? Whereby when they acted like childlike and they sang songs together and they were relaxed, that's when the phenomenon took place. That's when the table turning took place. It's as if we collectively can manipulate the reality around us, and in doing so, whatever it is can come through. It can actually use our orgon energy, if you were looking at the Wilhelm Reich idea, and it can manifest itself and it can plasticate itself, if there's such a term, within this reality.
I remember reading in psychology book probably many years ago that emotions were simply a pre-programmed response to an event. And I didn't like that idea because it didn't match the reality. I think spirit tap into emotion, and in particular, the loving bond between friends and maybe family, where laughter is a natural expression of something deeper that within the contact, the relationship. I'll give you an example. This is a fairly recent example. It happened about 3 years ago. I walked into a Glasgow cafe with Tom and Linda. My wife Sarah wasn't there, just the three of us. And I had bought a coaster because Tom sometimes says carpe diem, seize the day from this movie, I think. And I had found a coaster which says, let's carpe the hell out of this diem, right? So I bought the coaster, went to the cafe. We were about to sit at a very large bench table designed for maybe 6, 8 people. And as Tom and Linda sat down on the bench seat and I sat in a separate seat, I slapped down the coaster on the table and said, read that. And they looked at it and Tom said, let's carpe the hell out of this DM. And they both laughed and the table rose 2 feet in the air. Right? This isn't good light. This isn't a busy cafe. People turned and looked. Some began to leave. And I'm looking at the table saying, oh my God, this shouldn't be happening. And I put my elbows on it and I'm 14 stone. I was unable to shift it even by a few millimeters. It was as if I was the one who was light and the table was static. And then it went down. And just as I heaved a sigh of relief, I looked across the cafe and someone else's coffee table had begun to levitate with them about 4 inches or so off the ground, and it was wobbling like this. And the customer shouted in the waitress, who hadn't noticed any of this. She was in the kitchen collecting her orders. And he said, waitress, my table's wobbling, right? And as she turned to look at it, it came down. His table, I'm talking about. And mine was already down. And his table, and she went up, wiggled it, stuck a bit of cardboard under it, and the customer said, that's not going to work. It went right up in the bloody air. And he walked to the other side of the cafe and sat down at another table near the door. Our table didn't rise after that. But when I say 2 feet, that's a lot of height for a demonstration of levitation. And it was not possible to push the table back down. As I was leaving, I couldn't resist the opportunity for a little humour. And I leant over and said to that man with his new coffee table, subways are terrible under this floor, And I walked out, because there is actually a subway near that part of Glasgow. And he just looked shocked, as if, how could that possibly be an explanation? Now, the point is, why did that happen there? It was because I was introducing a note of humour, because Tom, Linda, and I are like family in terms of the loving bond and relationship we've got. And Tom said he could feel a pull from his solar plexus, which is a precursor to physical phenomena. I think if I'd walked in and said, politics, let's talk about something serious, there would have been no phenomena. That's my expectation. And I can tell you that I do feel bad about acknowledging years where I've sat with people and wasted their time because I've had a skeptical, evaluative attitude. I mean, I'm an educationalist, and I can tell you there's something similar happens in classrooms. Children react differently to learning if they think they're being rated, evaluated, compared to other people, criticised, in some way their efforts are being related to lots of other efforts in the past or other people's efforts. But if you get a child and a teacher who feels something, let's say emotional, but something caring towards the child, so much so that the child likes themselves and the company of that teacher, you have the beginning of something magical that can take place in the child's learning, now quite apart from the relationship. And I've seen this myself in my own career. I've had people approach me decades later to say that what they remember was not my hard-worked lesson plans, but the relationship that developed and how it inspired them and motivated them. I think there is something happening in the spirit world, at least with deceased persons, and why shouldn't it? We loved a lot of them when they were here on Earth, and they're still around. I have a book that I'm thinking of making the title "No One Dies." No one's ever died. They've just changed, and it's us that don't realise the nature of change.
Wow. Sarah, any comments, questions from your point of view there?
I really loved all of that. I loved the examples that you gave, Nick. They're very authentic feeling and specific. And, you know, I get a real sense of genuine curiosity and healthy skepticism with you, where it's not so much about, like you were saying, wanting to believe in this, but kind of being able to not avoid the fact that you're experiencing this phenomena is really fascinating. Yeah. There's a few questions from the audience which I've actually have noted down because sometimes I lose them, so I'll ask you those. Bill asks, have you ever had a bad contact through entities coming through these realms that you wish you hadn't come into contact with?
Not really. If you take that my involvement has been more than 30 years, if I make an effort, I can think of once when I was told that there was a black shape emerging behind me, and it was when I was investigating an alleged haunted house for a television documentary. I was recceing for a suitable house to visit. And I wasn't aware of that black cloud beginning to envelop me, almost like a pair of hands beginning to grab me from behind. But the people that were with me in the task saw it and asked me to walk out right away. And when I stepped outside of the building, I was very ill for about 2 or 3 minutes. I was vomiting. So I would put that down as a negative entity or a low-grade entity. And my friend said to me, the reason why you're vomiting is your body knows that it's been in touch with something that's not good for it, and it's simply expelling it in the only way it knows. So that's the closest I can come to, and that was a long time ago, and it wasn't in spiritualist or seance type work, but it was similar, it was related. Once I always ask for kind of protection when I do this kind of work and investigate houses and do seance work. It's become part of just a way of doing it. And once I asked for protection and I was aware that there was a presence outside of the room trying to get in, and it couldn't. And I closed sitting to prevent it from having the energy to somehow make its way in. And I don't know what that was. It was only a feeling of a negative presence outside of the room, and it couldn't get in. And I think that was because I was protected. But I took away the energy that attracted it like a moth to a flame. And that would be the only other time where I've experienced something negative. But let me finish in acknowledging Neil's sort of possible concern. A Christian acquaintance of mine once said, isn't this the work of the devil? And how do you know? Yeah. And I said, well, if you read your Bible, you realize that the devil doesn't go about doing good works for God. And everything that I do has a positive outcome for the people concerned. So that's one argument. Secondly, if I feel good, I'm in alignment with what is meant for me within my life purposes in the universe. And there's a feeling of this is good and I should build on it. And when it leads to healing outcomes, although I don't normally like talking about it, sometimes miraculous outcomes, I know that what I'm doing is worthwhile.
I think that that's a very interesting point that you bring up there. And I'm interested in this idea of, I guess I would think of it as a kind of developing coherent spirit practices in some way. Like you say, this sense of bliss emanating from your heart center creates these better experiences and attracts better experiences to you, and maybe makes me think about the electromagnetic ideas around consciousness and the fact that maybe these entities are somehow manifesting in this way. What do you think about that?
I would have to hold my hands up and say I don't know much about electromagnetism, although I have lots of fellow investigators who put great store by it. What they lack, I think, is empirical evidence to back it up. And I'll give you an example. I'm tempted to do another adventure. I did an adventure in South America, which I can tell you about, but I wanted to do another adventure in America. I've met some fascinating people, Native American Indians, First Nation people, and I wanted to go and share their experiences that they say they have back home. And of course, one of the most famous names in television for that kind of experience in America would be Skinwalker Ranch. I've watched several documentaries on Skinwalker, and I keep thinking, they're not doing it right. I wish I could go there and say, this is how to do it. If you want phenomena, if you don't want phenomena, just keep on doing what you're doing because you're scaring it away. But if you want phenomena, I would go there, and I would even go for my own expense. But I would have a different approach to these people who want to measure something in order to understand what it is they're dealing with. And I find it funny, even although I should be more respectful of that kind of mentality that says we have to be able to measure it. You know the story of I've got a tail and I've got a trunk and I've got big ears, but I don't see the elephant. My perceptions would be take me to a different starting point. I wouldn't point to say what's that white light up in that mesa there. I would be up in the mesa, linking with the light. But maybe that takes us off topic. I'm sure there are, we'll call them negative entities. I prefer the term sort of low life entities. And when people say, oh, really? I say, well, does that surprise you? You know, if you hold a party and invite people passing the street into your home, you're going to have a great time, probably, with most people, because most people are nice. And, everybody's flawed. So what happens if you get somebody who doesn't want to leave and the party's over? What happens if you get somebody who wants to spoil it or gate crash it? That's the question. Well, of course, in the earthly sphere, you would have the scuff a net or call it cops or something. But what do you do when it's in the discarnate, invisible entity kind of spirit sphere? I don't even like the term spirit. I think it's way outdated. I think interdimensional consciousness or something would be better. But it's a kind of part of the currency for talking about these things.
I think you're quite right there. I think that using the word spirit, I'm just jumping in very quickly here. The use of the word spirit has these kind of connotations of 19th century mediumship and everything. And I think disincarnate entities is probably a more powerful way of describing it here. I was just breaking in there because this is one of the things, whenever I hear the word spirit, it worries me because of the connotations. But going back, Sarah, was there any other questions from the...
Yeah, people are really interested in this. There's loads of comment questions on the chat. Ben asks, is the sensitivity perhaps a refinement of the art of empathy? Because you talk a lot about feeling love and being with your friends and being happy and emanating this joy feeling, and the disincarnate entities responding to that feeling. So do you think there's an element of development of empathy in it?
I'm sure they're related. I'm not sure which is the precursor to the other or the prerequisite. I just know that in my line of work, I wasn't just a teacher. I was a guidance, pastoral care kind of person, a problem solver, a fixer, a counsellor. And in that line of work, empathy is a prerequisite. So I would be sitting with people. One young lady springs to mind, and she was very upset but wouldn't tell anyone. And as I made the kind of comment you would expect an empathic person or counsellor to make, my intuition came in, and a communicator told me exactly what was wrong with her and what was going to happen next. So I told her her situation. She was pregnant. No one else knew. And I told her what was going to happen next. And that's what happened. And a year later, she came in with a little baby boy just to say, this is the guy that you predicted was going to arrive. And I just wanted him to say hello. So yeah,
lovely.
There's a definite interaction there, but I don't claim to be able to understand it.
It's interesting some of the stuff you're saying here, because I had a talk on my lecture club. I do a lecture club about Egyptology, and I had a guest talk about Mesopotamian, what we call demons, but they sound very similar to the kind of entities that you're describing, actually, because only with Christianity and some of the Abrahamic religions did we start to see them as being all negative. But I wanted to ask you about exorcism, because in Mesopotamian religious thought, the idea was that these people returned to their realm. You don't actually ever get rid of them fully, but have you ever been asked to get rid of an entity that's causing problems for somebody?
Yeah, I mean, it was only just about 3 years ago. I was over in Seattle with an investigator, Steve Mira, and a medium. And I spent 6 days there, and it was allegedly America's most demonic haunting. And Fox Television had already sent in the TV crew, and they scared the phenomena away, it would appear. The results were inconclusive. But as soon as they left, the phenomena came back. And I find that had it not been such a serious thing for the tenant, I would have found that funny. You know, what makes any of us so arrogant to think if we turn up with 2 Arctic trucks and surround the outside of the house with floodlights and go in and say, show yourselves, because I'm not frightened of you. What makes anybody think Spirit wants to respond to that? What Spirit wants is for you to sit down and shut up and listen. And then if they think that you're going to be helpful and respond appropriately, they might show themselves or communicate. Anyway, we went there, we quieted the whole thing down, and as I say, I don't think there are experts in the paranormal, but I might be persuaded to accept the expert of somebody who stops the paranormal. And I sometimes wish I wasn't so good at that, because I'm fascinated. Somebody once said to me, doesn't it scare you when the paranormal manifests? And I say, okay, you spend your life believing there's such a thing as a pink rhino. And after years of searching, you see one. You don't go screaming with your hands in the air in the opposite direction, the way most haunted would have you do. There's a television program they used to. What you do is you move closer cautiously, and you try and get in good terms with it, so that you can understand something you have believed existed. Deceased human persons are the same in their moral character and in their personality and the mannerisms as they were on Earth. In as much as we all changed, no doubt over time they would also change with new learning and so on. But when people have a fear of deceased persons communicating, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, unless of course they're fearful of people in the earth plane anyway. Maybe they lead fear-filled lives. I have been accused of being foolish enough to lead a fearless life. I will walk into any situation believing myself to be protected, especially if there's children involved. I don't do a lot of case investigations now compared to when I used to, but I did 2 cases in recent years where children were spared, 3 cases. And in each case, I took away the fear and removed the phenomenon. But in one case, I had to bring the entity home with me, which I regret in some ways. It helped the family, but it gave me a couple of weeks of challenging interaction.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I was asked to visit a home in which the workmen doing essential work had left. They said they were getting shouted at by invisible voices and tools were being thrown around. Their good work was being trashed and so on. And I was asked by a very anxious mum to see what I could do because the renovation work the repairs had to be done. And as I approached the house, I was aware of a spirit entity already reacting to my arrival. And I went with my wife and we walked round the house, and I reckon there were 3 spirit persons in the house, one of whom she acknowledged she had known since she was a girl, because she lived in that house when she was a girl and she returned as an adult to buy it. And the same ghost was still there and made himself known to her. But the other people were either attached to the house or maybe attached to her, and they were persuaded to leave. But one of them didn't want to. And I said, you know what? I think you've got a mischievous sense of fun. I don't think there's any badness in it. And you can have more fun in my house if you come back, because I can hear you, I can talk to you, and I can interact with you. But I do want you to learn to move on, because hanging about annoying people isn't your life purpose. And you still have life purposes, even though you're not in a physical body anymore. But he had to be persuaded. He was locked earthbound a little bit. And I asked him to move on, but it was a process of continuing conversations and goodwill. I mean, I don't know whether any of your viewers will relate to this, but when I pray, or as I prefer to call it, send out statements of healing intentions, I include people who have passed to the other side. They still need healing. They still need thoughts of positivity and loving kindness and empathy and care and concern. Just because they've shed the body like a snakeskin doesn't mean to say they don't have needs and that they can't make therapeutic, nurturing use of our relationship and our energy.
Fascinating. Sarah, any more?
One question from Danny. He asks, can you tell us about Colin Fry?
Yeah, well, not much. I've got plenty to say about things I know about. And I don't normally speak ill of people where I've heard stories and I don't know them. And that would be the category of Colin Fry would come into. I know that Colin Fry devoted many years to the promotion and development of mediumship, long before he became a television sort of personality. And I know that he did so often at his own expense, and that he developed a moniker would be the name, an alias called Lincoln, when he did successful demonstrations of trance and physical mediumship. When he got into television, and I don't know this for a fact, so I'm happy to be corrected by anyone who did know him, I think ego complicated his mediumship, because it became important to maintain a certain standard of presentation, and spirit weren't interested maybe in always doing that for him. So, like many mediums, where they lose the spirit link, they can't just go and sit down in front of an audience and expect everybody to wait. So what they do is they fill in the gap with a bit of padding. And I could see that Colin had to do that sometimes. After his TV fame, as it were, it is alleged that he was caught in a physical circle, apparently in the cabinet doing trance mediumship. He was caught outside of the cabinet, dressed in very dark clothing, so that any tiny glimmer of light wouldn't betray him. And he was moving around interacting with sitters who were effectively blinded by the darkness. I've heard this, and I'm prepared to believe that it's possible, but I wasn't there, and it could be that he's simply suffering from what most mediums suffer from, which is lies told by jealous people. So He then left, I think, to go to Sweden, and he continued to work under the radar of the media with his College of Mediumship in Sweden. And some good mediums have come out of there. So I think the story of Colin Fry is a sad one, and it's controversial, but I can't claim to be able to shed much light on that, except to make sure that even if he ended up falsifying something, there were many, many years of genuine positivity in what he did before that. A bit like Derek Okora. Derek Okora made some mistakes, allegedly, but I also think Derek Okora, for many years, before he became a household sort of name and Most Haunted and so on, I think he did a lot of very effective mediumship. And I don't know what happened afterwards, but I've heard reports and they don't cover him in glory.
That's interesting, that, because one of our previous guests was stage hypnotist Alan Bates. And Alan worked very closely with Derek Okora for many years. And I've known Alan for many, many years. And he will not have anything wrong said about Derek, because he said he witnessed things that, you know, in private that Derek could do. And I think, again, we have the same problem here as with Colin Fry, in that when you become famous, you have to do it on demand, as it were. And you place yourself in positions where you have to do it on demand, and suddenly it doesn't happen for you anymore. You know, it's like hypnagogic imagery. You know, effectively, as long as you start to try and manipulate hypnagogic imagery, it leaves you and you lose it in some way. And I think this is the challenge with an awful lot of stage mediums, where there is a scintilla of something, but because it becomes money and it becomes fame orientated, they lose that. And I think it was the sensitivity of empathy that you were talking about before, and basic humanity maybe. And I think that's the sad side of that.
I was friendly with the late Glasgow medium and healer Albert Best. And
oh, yes, of course.
He had demonstrated miraculous mediumship in front of me with wonderful stories that he was able to validate. But he once said to me, you know, Nick, when ego steps in, spirits step out. Not always, but often. He said, and people who get too full of themselves and who seek fame and fortune, spirit step back, because that's certainly not what they're interested in.
Yeah, because that's it. I've heard some very good things about Albert Best over the years. And clearly he was somebody that really had something quite special. But he worked not necessarily underneath the radar, but he was somebody that never really sold out to the extent of others. Right, I'm aware of time now, and we're well into the chat and interview now, and I'm very keen that we don't lose the opportunity to talk about the other string of your interest, your ayahuasca experiences, particularly because this is also one of the themes of this show, and we've had a number of individuals who are researching ayahuasca and DMT under professional capacities, under academic circumstances and everything else. So if you'd share a little bit about your experiences with DMT and ayahuasca, because when we were chatting yesterday, I was very intrigued by it. So it's yet another angle on the whole mystery of DMT and entheogens. So if you want to chat about that, would be really great.
Yep. I would say it's in the singular. I've only taken ayahuasca once, but I was not transformed. I was profoundly moved by the experience, but I do not think it was necessarily a spiritual or interdimensional, discarnate kind of communication. I think it's more likely to be my conscious mind interacting with my subconscious mind because a drug has made the bridge. But let me tell you about the experience, because it might trigger some thinking, people. First of all, Spirit told me to go to South America. They wanted me to go to a place called Sao Paulo. I didn't know where that was. I didn't know whether it was a city or a country or what, or a region. But I asked Spirit, okay, I'll take myself to Sao Paulo, but can I go and see Machu Picchu? And the Spirit communicator laughed and said, oh, yeah, you can go where you want, but why? Why would you want to go there? And I said, well, I've always heard people talking about Machu Picchu, and I've always wanted to go, and we're going to be in South America. And he laughed and he said, okay, but you need to remember to go to Sao Paulo. So I went to Machu Picchu and I saw the wonderful ruins there. They call it the Crystal Mountain because sometimes when the light hits the kind of quartzy granite stone, it shimmers, it sparkles. But when I went there, I got in touch with Cucho. Cucho is a shamanic guru, if you like. You might not like the term, teacher maybe. And he agreed to meet me, and I simply told him my story, which is Spirit told me to come to South America because they had something they wanted to teach me. And I feel that maybe you're one of the people that has something to teach me. And he said, I have not yet started doing private ayahuasca sessions this year. He said, but I'll do it for you because of what you told me. He said, and I believe it. So he took me the next day, next evening, to the darkened room of our function suite. Not completely dark, but not lit by electric light except from the outside. The light was shining in the windows. And he said, you realize that you might be sick. You need to have a strong heart because ayahuasca will have quite an impact on you. And I was okay as far as my heart was concerned. And I was a little taken aback when he handed me a toilet roll and a basin and pointed the toilet was only a few yards away. And that seemed to be important to him. So I wasn't sure what effect it was going to have on me. And then he gave me, after a brief ceremony which involved him singing and chanting and praying and so he eventually gave me a bitter tasting brown liquid. And after approximately 10 minutes, I began to think I'd been conned. Well, he dressed the part, he looked the part, he was actually a very likable person, even impressive shaman. But I hadn't experienced anything. And I thought, maybe I'm getting ripped off here. He charged me a small amount of money, small maybe not for his circumstances, but I waited. Then I noticed light shimmering round the window frames, and I immediately thought, well, that'll be a flashing neon light somewhere, and I'm just getting the reflection. And I closed my eyes, and I suddenly found, when I closed my eyes, I was aware of a large dome-like lattice structure, as if it was made from black tubes all connected, but it filled my field of view. And I opened my eyes again, I was back in the room. But this time the flashing lights were stronger around the windows and there were shadow people moving on my left. So I closed my eyes again and the lattice structure was there still, but even bigger and stronger. And then I noticed robotic spiders moving towards me. And I said, if this is intended to scare me, it doesn't. You know. So come closer if you want. And I opened my eyes again and found the same room, but now there was a sense of some sort of presence. And the shadow people there were more of them and they were stronger. So I closed my eyes again. I didn't want to go into some kind of mediumistic contact. I wanted to go inside to see what the ayahuasca could do. And when I closed my eyes, I then saw that the robotic spiders had changed into little Peruvian models that looked like stumpy things you would find in a market stall. I hadn't seen them up to that point, but I did afterwards. And I thought of them as representations of Peruvian gods. And like little toys, they were kind of moving towards me, and they seemed to be animated, and I got a sense of life about them. But subsequent to that, I saw them in market stalls with the same psychedelic dotted patterns and lines on them. And I went, that's what I saw in my ayahuasca dream. I haven't seen them before. I didn't do any research before my visit. And then I noticed there was a person standing to my left. And he was in a one-piece Venetian black and white checkerboard costume with a full face mask. So I wasn't sure whether it was male, female, or even human. He could have been robotic for all I know. But when he spoke to me, he had his left hand on a vertical bar of a silver framed door. And I said to him, I am here to learn. Are you the person I have to learn from? And he said, huh, just like a kind of grunt of disdain. He said, we've been asking to work with you full time for years. You've only ever given us part time and you're still playing at it. And I said to him, you might call it playing, mate, but it's cost me thousands to come here and I've given up a month of my life and I'm willing to give up more. And I noticed his hand in the door and I said, am I to go through there? He said, only if you're purified. And that's when I started to vomit. And I was brought back to the room in which it looked just as it did before, with a sense of shadow people rather than seeing them. And I was vomiting quite violently. And after several minutes, Scripture said to me, do you want to go back into that experience? I can give you a second dose. And I said, yes, please. And I took it and closed my eyes. And I was through the door into a corridor with doors coming off it. And the door was closed. And I said to the guy, I said, are these doors of opportunity for me? Because I was excited by the thought that I might take it to another level of consciousness. And he said, no, these are doors of opportunity from your past that you kept shut. And I thought, right, I'm going to test to see whether you know me. I said, what's it like to work with me as a medium? And he waved his right arm. And looking down, as if it was onto a quayside of a small harbour or something, there was a makeshift raft bobbing about the ocean wave, tied to the quayside, and about 80 to 100 people queued up. And as each person jumped onto the raft, it tipped them off, and they could climb back onto the harbour. And somebody else would jump onto the other bit of the raft, and they would get tipped. And then two people would jump on it, would bounce up and down it, but eventually they would fall. And I said something rather unkind. I'll not repeat it to your audience, but I swore and said, I guess I'm the raft, the unstable one, the unreliable one. And all these people in spirit are patiently queuing up, and it's me that's the problem. And you laugh, as if it was a laugh of affirmation. And then I looked to my right, and there was like an open space with round tables and lots of non-human figures looking at me, as if they'd stopped taking their coffee or whatever, and they were looking at me standing, having this interaction with this Venetian guy. So I opened my eyes again, back into the darkened room. Probably 5 minutes had passed, and I was expecting another hit from the ayahuasca, which hadn't happened. I closed my eyes again, and the same Venetian figure was there, with the little god beings on my right, but this time he was holding, the first time it was a bronze handle, the second time it was a silver handle. I presumed that maybe there would be a third, the gold handle, and I said, are we going through here now? And he said, to get through here, you need to be purified further. You need to be purged. And I began to heave and vomit again. And when I came out of that, Future said, thank God you're still with me. He said, I saw an enormous flash of white light come out of your chest. I thought I'd lost you. I've only seen that once or twice before, and it's always when people are dying. And I said, no, I'm still here, just feel very sick. He said, well, I don't think you should have a third dose. And that was the end of the experience. I was still under the influence of drugs 6-8 hours later. And my friend had to help me get on the train for the next bit of our journey south. And when I spoke to him about the experience, he said, and do you think it was spiritual? I said, no. I said, I think it was provocative. I think it was something for me to think about. I think I'll probably be changed in my perceptions and opinions about some things, such as my own mediumship. I said, but no. And he said, why not, when you come from such a spiritualist perspective? And I said, it's very simple. Nobody told me during that experience anything that I didn't already know. I said, so the information could easily have come from my subconscious. Why wasn't I told something that nobody knew And then I subsequently found it to be correct. And I said, I believe spirit are clever. I just don't know why they keep going for simplistic messages. And that's more or less my position. I read Graham Hancock's book before I went. I remember he refers to some kind of geometric pattern and being surrounded by some and creatures and so on. But I think it came from my own mind. I have good reasons to think that. I've always been thought of as an ideas person. I've always had a vivid imagination. I trained in English literature and the development of language early on. I think our subconscious minds are as unexplored as the planets around us. And if we knew what goes on in our subconscious minds, we would just shrug our shoulders and say, obviously, the drug was able to make connections that are not normally available. But can I jump a little bit in the story before people give me questions?
Yeah, no, please.
When I went to Sao Paulo, and Tony knows this just from a conversation the other day, I arrived at night in a hotel in Sao Paulo. I realised it was a city, but beyond that, I didn't know. And my friend who came with me is a very sceptical physicist. He didn't take part in ayahuasca or anything, but he was there to share the adventure. At breakfast the following morning, he says, well, we're here. Spirit asked you to go to Sao Paulo. You're in Sao Paulo. Who are you going to visit? And I said, I don't know. He said, no, you've got a name and an address or something. And I said, no. And he said, Nick, I've come halfway around the world with you. What do you mean you don't have a name and an address? He said, what are you going to do to make a point of value to your trip? I said, I'm going to go for a walk. He said, what do you think is going to happen there? I said, if I am asked by spirit to go to Sao Paulo and I come to Sao Paulo, they'll not let me down. And he was aghast. He thought I'd lost my mind. This is just so foreign to him. He said, do you realise that you're going to go for a walk in a city 3 times the size of London, in which we will look like targets because we're not dressed and we don't look local? And Sao Paulo has a reputation, even if you don't know it. And I said, let's go for a walk. And I walked in a meandering straight line for about 40 minutes, maybe 30 odd minutes. And the first building I stopped outside of was a 12-storey office block, which had the word Esprit on the front wall. And I figured it probably made trainers or sportswear or something because. And I walked through the front doors and I saw a bust of Allan Kardec, who, for those of you who don't know, was the founder of Spiritism, South American, Brazilian spiritualism, if you like. So I knew that I'd walked into somewhere that had a link. And the woman came up to me and she said, I think it was in Spanish, she said, hello, can I help you? And I said in English, unfortunately, my Spanish is terrible. I said, I've been sent by spirit from Scotland. And she smiled and she called the president over. The guy turned out to be the president of the place, the CEO. She called him over and she told him in Spanish what I just said. And he broke into a wider smile. He said, yeah, Spirit told us 2 weeks ago to expect a visitor from Scotland. You're very welcome. And he allowed me to go to all of their activities. It turned out that 11 stories of this 12-storey building was the largest spiritual healing centre in South America. And I spent 3 and a bit days talking to them, sharing the healing that they were doing, taking part in the healing, commenting on the healing. I was able to watch 3 healers work with a patient, and I was asked my opinion, and I said, this is fascinating for me. This wouldn't happen in the UK normally. I said, but the person on the right is lacking the energy. And they said, take her place. And I took her place, and I was able to feel the surge and power of energy passing through me, anchoring maybe heaven on earth for the purposes of helping this patient. And it was a wonderful experience for me. And I stepped back and I was able to attend some lectures and see their processes, very like a hospital, but with spiritual healing in mind. So I came away and began to do more healing work here back in Scotland. And I've got lots of very pleasant memories, both of Pucho and Machu Picchu and Rio, where I popped in and did just a few days. I got photobombed by Jesus, of course, as I took the photograph. Jesus, Christ the Redeemer statue appeared above my friend's head, but for real, not as a spiritual incarnation. And when I came away from Sao Paulo, I would love to go back, but I'd love to go back for much longer. It was Lion Playfair who wrote about a flying cow. He spoke about the body scanning by spiritual healers in South America, and I wanted to see that, and I wanted to meet John of God, although I subsequently found out he was in jail. And I wanted to go to a place in the Brazilian jungle, which was like the Institute for Higher Consciousness Studies or something. I've got the book on parapsychology, projectiology.
Oh yeah, Waldo Vieira.
Yeah, I wanted to go to his place simply because I'd heard about it. But I didn't.
Exactly, that was exactly when you mentioned Sao Paulo, and I thought, the work of Waldo Vieira, because members of his group have been here, and I interviewed one of their top people a few years ago here. Very, very interesting projectology, isn't it? And effectively, they have a campus down in Portugal.
I can't read it. It's too much for me. It's like the Encyclopedia Britannica for the paranormal.
It's the biggest book I've ever seen in my life. It's huge, massive.
Too much detail. And I'm going to say something that I don't normally say, and I'd probably rather say it privately to you, Tony, but I'll just take the opportunity. An awful lot of people write and speak about, let's call it interdimensional communication. Who've never seen an apple, never seen a levitation, who have never actually had a communicator manifest materially and physically in front of witnesses. So I'm prepared to put these places and their books and their theorizing to one side and say, show me that there's something behind your words. And that's still the position I'm in at the moment. Probably some of your viewers will go, oh, Nick, you've not learned very much or whatever, but that's still the way I feel. I look for paranormality or demonstrations of power and gifts and abilities, rather than just accept people who can write books.
I think it's a very good point.
A lot of people theorizing out there, but let me put it this way. There's an investigator with 30 years experience in England, I'll not mention him, who smiled as if I was spinning a joke about table levitation. So I said, come up to Glasgow, let's go for dinner, you pick up the tab if any of the tables levitate, and they did. I didn't hold it to pay the dinner tab, but he said, in 30 years of investigations, this has never happened to me in a public place, like a restaurant, under electric light. And when I was telling that story to a film producer, he said, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that. I said, okay, come to the restaurant, pay the bill if you see something you can't explain. And it happened to him too. Right? It actually happened with the investigator to two different tables. So it couldn't even be that we were manipulating one. It was two adjacent tables and they were both sliding around. Every time he went to write someone's pad, the table moved away from him. Whenever he put his pen down, the table came back in. And to me, whatever is going on, that's significant. And if you spend 30 years of your life writing books and making claims of understanding this, that, and the other, I'll shrug my shoulders and say my favourite work, which is maybe. I'll pay attention to the people that can do the other stuff.
I think it's spot on. The thing is that people like myself, we try to come up with hypotheses and we try to come up with models, but in terms of the actual phenomenon, it's witnessing the phenomenon. It's an equivalent of Plato's cave, which Sarah and I were involved in an event 2 years ago about. It's the idea of it's actually seeing is believing. And when you come across these phenomena, I mean, one of the things that leapt out to my mind about your discussions of your ayahuasca experiences, have you read any Terence McKenna?
Not recently, although I know the name.
Okay, because that I found very intriguing, because Terence McKenna he was one of the major writers on ayahuasca. And one of the things that McKenna came up with is a term called the machine elves. And when you were describing the insect spider-like beings and the way they were moving, immediately in my mind was, Nick is describing machine elves in exactly the same way that Terence McKenna described. Now, this is of profound importance, because if you are experiencing something that other people have experienced and described consistently within the DMT ayahuasca experience without prior knowledge of the fact of the machine elves, that is to me significant, because it means there's a consistency here with other people's reports. The other thing I was intrigued in was the figurines that you mentioned, and you said you hadn't seen them before, and yet they manifested within your ayahuasca experience. Now, that suggests to me short-term precognition of your own immediate future, whereby you were going to be encountering these figurines at some time in your future, which means that your future memory, your future mind was coloring your present mind to populate from your subconscious your experience. Now, that to me was precognition. And as far as I'm aware, there is no materialist reductionist scientist who ever acknowledges the fact of precognition. So here we had two fantastically significant events that you were describing there that you weren't necessarily aware of. I hadn't primed you to bring those things up in any shape or form. You just did. And these were part of your genuine experience. That was powerful to me. Very, very powerful. Sarah, have you got Nick? Yeah, you make your point first, and then we'll go back to Sarah.
It was the very next day I saw the figurines in a market stall, little clay models. I call them dumpy clay models. And then in subsequent days I saw variations of that kind of theme. But I hadn't been to a market stall prior to the Machu Picchu visit, and I hadn't even seen photographs of what to expect. I deliberately wanted to keep my experience of Machu Picchu fresh and not coloured by previous visits or photographs. Yeah.
Well, that was what you were talking about there, was very much vindicated by the work of J.W. Dunn and his 1927 book, An Experiment with Time. You know, the idea that our dreams and our confabulations consist of things that we will encounter in our immediate future, and the subconscious embroiders them within dreams, but they're still precognitive, you know. So to me, extraordinary events need extraordinary explanations, and that was a classic example.
Yeah, I've heard that quote before. Can I say to you that I once asked a spirit communicator, a spirit guide, what some people would call them, to comment on time, and he said it's very difficult to explain things on our side because you just don't have the vocabulary and the understanding to see it clearly. But think of your experience of time as being like a dripping tap. Present moment experience, oh, it's away. Present moment experience, oh, it's away. That's all your experience of time is. You might have experienced how the tap has been dripping like this for decades, but it's always the same. You're only aware of the dripping tap. Our experience of time is that when we look at your situation, we see your recent past and your near future. He said it's almost as if your blinkeredness of only being able to see the present almost all of the time is different from ours, because we see the before and the after, not completely, but wide enough for us to be able to make comments and see it in more perspective. Now, that's not much of an explanation, but it helps me to realize they can see a bit more of my situation than I can.
Well, I think it's incredibly accurate, because effectively, you know, James, the psychologist, had a term called the specious present. And the specious present is much more expanded than our concept of now, where it encompasses the immediate past and the immediate future. And we know research done by people like Dean Radin and Dick Bierman, when they did a series of experiments where the skin conductance of individuals changed in anticipation of something that had yet to be experienced. Now, clearly, if you look outside of time, I mean, I'm questioning, like, for instance, the work of people like Julian Barber and the idea of the end of time, the idea that time, there is an orthogonal time, that is a time that runs at a right angle to this time. whereby you can see, and I've used the analogy, and it's not original, you know, the idea of we exist in a train compartment and we only see the train station in our future or in our past. But if you're sitting on the top of the train, you can encompass your immediate future and your immediate past, because it's all to do with the critical fusion facility of the eye. It's all to do with how we perceive time, whether time is quantized, whether there are things like Alan Finkelstein call them chronons. And there's more research now going on to the idea that time is quantized in exactly the same way as matter and energy are quantized. So your entity there was saying something of profound importance, I think. Now, again, he was describing their Minkowski's block time. So there's an awful lot of information in that very short statement. And I think the analogy of the dripping tap is excellent. And I think it really describes it in a very, very profound way. Sarah, have you got any points again from your side in terms of this?
There was a few things. I really loved what you said, Nick, about our subconscious is as little explored as the planets around us. And I think that it's very true. One of our previous guests, Rebecca Sharrock, she has superior autobiographical memory. And because she has such a highly developed memory, she is able to pinpoint where a lot of her imaginal experiences come from. And I think that's very interesting, because I think a lot of people are unfamiliar with their own subconscious activity and therefore don't know where some of their ideas come from. So I think that's a good point you brought up there. One of the things I wanted to ask you about your travels in South America is the culture of psychic surgery. Is that something that you came across?
No, not in South America. That was the reason for wanting to see John of God, but not being able to fit it into my month's schedule. And subsequently, of course, he's been accused and indeed imprisoned for sexual offences. So I think it probably would put me off from consulting him in other matters, but who knows? However, I have witnessed psychic surgery with Albert Best in Scotland. And I'll tell you just the gist of the story. It's Albert said to me, "Would you like to see the healing that I do?" And I said, "I'd love to see it." And he said, "Okay, come to my flat in such and such a day." Now, this is an ordinary little tenement flat. You would walk past it and never think twice. But heads of government came to see him there. Stars of film and television, Paul Newman and Tina Turner. And I've met some of his famous acquaintances. And I have to draw a kind of veil over most of that, because Albert said to me, "I'm less interested in someone's fame than the reason for the distress that brought them to my door." And he said, "That's the thing to focus on." So I always do, and I always think people's distress should be kept as a private. But Albert, I turned up and there was a young man in a wheelchair, and he had hydrocephalus, which is a swelling of the fluid in the brain. So I could tell that he was probably already quite ill and differently abled maybe, but being in a wheelchair, he certainly didn't look at all well. And I was told by his mother, who was present, that he'd been diagnosed with a brain tumour. And it was because she knew of Albert's reputation that she brought her son up from England. And Albert sat down in a chair near the boy. I say boy, he was a teenager. And closed his eyes and went into a trance-like state in which he began to speak in a German accent. This is an uneducated Irishman. I don't know if he could speak in any accent other than an Irish version of English, Scottish version of English. So I was slightly taken aback, and he stood up with his eyes shut and put his hands on the young man's skull, and immediately pulled up a black or dark globular mass, which was put into a water basin and taken away by his assistant. And I thought to myself, could be sleight of hand, could be a magical kind of trick, but he's not making money out of this situation, and persons come over from England. Would you really want to manipulate them like that? Everything I knew about him, he never told me a lie. other than the normal exaggeration that comes with Irish banter and humour, he never told me a lie. So I believe that I might have seen genuine psychic surgery. And a week later, the mother was able to confirm that she took him immediately to the oncologist, who apologised to her and said, "I'm sorry, we must have mixed up your son's x-rays with another patient because he doesn't have a tumour."
Extraordinary.
And all I remember was the closed eyes, the German accent, which was Albert's German doctor guide, who sometimes came through, and he put his hand on the boy's head and went like that. And it was hard to describe it, like a dark jelly. And he just went like that, shook it, with his eyes closed, shook it in a basin of water that was held underneath his hand. And he sat back down, and when he came to later on, he was back to being Albert. Impressive theatrical dramatics, not if the young man was healed in a miraculous way. So you need both bits of the story to really say, is this possible? I believe so. I believe it happened in front of me. So why aren't we devoting an awful lot more time and attention to figuring out how that worked? That would be my argument. I'm trying to think of what would interest your audience, and there might be people sitting at home saying, maybe it's all codology or imagination. So can I give you, would you be interested in hearing an example of a message I was asked to give someone that surprised even me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sarah, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I don't talk about my mediumship, and I don't want to be thought of as somebody who can do this at will and demand. However, what happened was my wife has a friend for many, many years who lived in England, and my wife and I were sitting, my wife was sitting one night, I joined her later, and a woman materialised in front of my wife. And my wife clairvoyant, so sometimes she sees spirit, and she said, "Hello, who are you?" And the elderly lady said, "My name is Elizabeth." "Hello, Elizabeth, and why are you here?" And she said, "I'm here for Margaret. I'm concerned about Margaret." And then she disappeared. So I came in the door, I don't know, half an hour later, and my wife said to me, "I've had a visitor from spirit, an old lady who said her name is Elizabeth, and she's concerned or worried about Margaret." I said, "Margaret who?" She said, "She disappeared before she could tell me." So I have a mother, Margaret, so I phoned her up, she was fine. My wife has an aunt, Margaret, and she phoned someone who confirmed that the aunt was fine. And I said to my wife and I agree, whenever we get spontaneous messages like this, they're never wrong. So we were mystified as to who Margaret was and what was the concern that we were being asked to help with. It was several days later that my wife's friend in England phoned up my wife, Sarah, and said, "I've just been told that my sister, Mags, is dying of cancer. She may only have days or weeks to go." And we thought, Mags, of course. We'd never thought of Mags because it was a second sort of TV link, and we had only ever known her as Mags. We didn't think it was Margaret. And why anyway? Why would Margaret's mother, or someone to do with Margaret? We found out that Mags, or Margaret's mother, was in fact Elizabeth, and matched the description of the elderly woman that here. And we went to the funeral because I thought if spirit are manifesting and the woman died, then maybe we'll to do something helpful. Maybe we'll see her at the funeral, we'll give comfort for people. None of that happened. It was an ordinary kind of funeral, beautiful nonetheless. And then I said to my wife, "Have you said to your friend that we got this message?" And she said, "Not yet." But when she did tell her friend, after several weeks, really in the grieving process to kind of work its way out, my friend jumped in a car from the south of England and came up to Scotland. And I came in one night from teaching my meditation class, and she said, I said, oh, why are you here? And she said, because Sarah told me the story, and I think that was my mother, and if she can come through about Mags, and Mags is now past, maybe she'll come through again, and I want to be here if that happens. So this is what I don't like. I don't like being put on the spot. You know, the person driven 8-10 hours to be with me, and here I was saying, oh, I'm kind of tired, I'm just going to go to bed. My empathic side of me comes out. So I said, okay, let me sit down and see if I can contact anyone. And I genuinely didn't know what would happen, but I sensed an energy within 5 minutes building up to my right. And I said, telepathically, is that you, Mags? And she said, yes. And I said, I'm excited. I sent the thought, so do you know that your sister's here? And she said, yes, that's why I'm here. So she was speaking to, you know, a simple little boy who hadn't understood how these things work. And I went, oh, great. So I turned to this friend, I'll call her Sheila, that's her real name. And I said, Sheila, I might have Mags here, and we're all looking, can't see anything. I said, I sense the energy. What do you want to know? And she said, where is she? And is she happy? I turned to this invisible space, you know, this entity that I couldn't see. And I said out loud, did you hear that, Mags? And the voice came back from my head, yes. I said, so what do you have to say? I said it out loud. And she said, tell her that I'm in a place like heaven, but it's not heaven. It's not perfect. But give me some time and I'll see what I can do. And Sheila burst out laughing because her sister had been employed as a troubleshooter for a national company. And she was the person they sent in to turn the branch around in a week or two or to close it. So the sister was saying something that she knew that Sheila would understand by saying, hey, it's not perfect, but give me a bit of time. I can have in joke. And I was slightly disappointed that I wasn't understanding the joke until it was explained. And I said, what about the other question? You know, where are you and are you happy? She said, when I arrived on the other side, I was welcomed by a little group of family and friends and acquaintances, and they made me feel very welcome, and there were lots of laughs and kisses and cuddles. And she said it's very nice, and I'm still one. So I relayed that telepathic communication to Sheila. And then Sheila stuck a spanner in the works, or at least asked me a question I didn't expect. She said, Nick, I know you wouldn't deliberately lie to me or attempt to deceive me, but maybe you're mistaken. How do I know this communication is really from my sister? Mags. And I turned to the invisible space and I said out loud, did you hear that question? She said, yes. I said, so how can you prove it's you? And this is, I'm going to say this very slowly because the words are important. She said, tell her, because the voice was only something I could hear, tell her that when I crossed to the other side, I was met by a little group, a committee, if you like, of family and friends and people I had known in life. And it was very nice to welcome them. And there's lots of love and laughter and kisses. And I made them laugh, she said, because I was wearing bright red high heels. And I said to them, is it okay to wear these here? And a man stepped forward and said, well, you can if you want, Bob, but nobody's going to hear you coming. And I opened my eyes and looked at Sheila, and the tears were running down her cheeks. And I said, I'm sorry, Sheila. You asked me for proof, and all I got was the same story of being welcomed on the other side. And Sheila said, tell me exactly what she said, and I repeated it. And she said, I put bright red high heels on my sister's corpse before the undertaker screwed down the coffin lid, and I made him promise not to tell anyone.
Wow.
Nobody knows what you just said. How did you know? She said, only Mags would have known that. That's all the proof I need. I can go home.
Wow.
But I didn't understand it. You know what I mean? Up to that point, I was apologizing for my communication. It seemed to be a repetition.
Yeah.
But to Sheila, it was exactly the bit of the jigsaw that she needed. Now, since then, Mags has come through 2 or 3 times, and she's commented on her follow-up kind of memorial service and a tree planting, naming ceremony, and so on. And she's a lot more kind of interactive. So that's an example. Now, when I reflect on that, I say all of that could have been some kind of educated guesswork from cold reading a grieving person and so on. But what are the chances? In all the people I know who've died in my life, I've never known anyone to wear bright red hand heels or an item of clothing that's unexpected before the undertaker seals the coffin and is made to promise not to tell anyone. At best, it would be guesswork based on what did they wear when they were alive. And Mags had never worn these shoes. They were bought and put in the shoebox at the bottom of the wardrobe. Car to bar shoes, I think she called them, but she never got the chance to go to the bar to wear them.
That is extraordinary. And I think we can't follow that in any way. I think that's the perfect ending to a fascinating interview. Nick, if anybody wants to contact you or your work or your writings, is there any way that people can do that?
Maybe through a Facebook post or something. I don't really have a website. I don't self-promote, and I'm even a little bit uncomfortable with people thinking that I can do this on demand.
Well, that's the honesty I like. It's the honesty that shines through, I think. Sarah, have you got any final comments?
No, that's it. It's brilliant. Really enjoyed today's conversation. Thank you so much, Nick.
Nick, that's been really wonderful. Thank you very much. And
keep up the good work, Anthony. I've got most of your books. I'm going to get the last one that you've written, and I think you have got a talent for picking up the threads that help us to understand the tapestry picture, big picture.
Thank you very much. Coming from you, Nick, that really means a lot to me. So thank you very much. You are somebody I've admired for a long time, and that was simply extraordinary. And I was just enthralled. And I think Sarah was the same, and I think people listening in. And I know when this goes up onto YouTube, there will be even more comments and everything else as well. So Nick, thank you very much for sharing 2 hours with us and sharing your experiences. It's been really wonderful. And everybody else as well, thank you very much, folks, for listening in. And we will be with you next Monday when we've got a special edition when we will be discussing Alice in Wonderland. And there will be a small group of us who will be discussing Lewis Carroll and his writings as well. So until next week, thank you very much for listening in, and best for all of you and everything else as well. And let's just hope this weather starts to improve. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, guys.